Hello and welcome to the Color Mentor podcast. My name is Paul Hanrahan. I'm a colorist, originally from South Africa. Now I'm based in Taiwan. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to people who have mentored and inspired me on my color grading journey over the years. So welcome to the show. If you'd like to learn more about color grading, you can head over to my Patreon. It's called Color Mentor at patreon.com, and it includes test footage, color charts, basic skill training, all the way up to full coursework on various topics. I also offer one-on-one mentoring for those who want to refine their craft further. But without further ado, let's get on with the show. Hi there, and welcome to the second part of my interview with Kevin Shaw. In this section, I talked to him about the Colorist Society and around the drive for the industry to organize itself in general. I've had a fair amount of experience with these kind of industry organization attempts in the past, so I thought I'd just give an introduction which summarizes some of the concerns. This is just a list of issues rather than any attempt to solve anything. So why do industries organize? It's a good question. Cynically, one could say that if you're busy, you're swamped in jobs, it's the last thing you're going to think about. But once work becomes scarce, then it's going to become a priority for everyone. So it's probably a good time now to have this discussion now that the worldwide industry is in decline and in a stage of restructuring. At its core, involvement in these organizations is basically work done for free by the members themselves. It's time spent building communities with no guarantee of any tangible return, and you are interacting with your competitors, which is something that some people don't like, but that is a trend that is fading out. So the first point is facing your competitors and engaging in dialogue. It's a process of finding out if indeed you are stronger together or not. Is there mutual benefit to be had through dialogue? In the past, isolation and secrecy were more common. Facility bosses didn't want their staff fraternizing with staff from other companies, and definitely not sharing insights which might affect any competitive edges that they had in the market. Is it better that we colorists, for example, are unified or isolated? And the question is, better for who? From the member's point of view, it's often asked, what benefit do I get for paying this membership fee to this organization? And often the answer is just, you get to give more of your free time to this non-profit organization, which isn't a very compelling argument. At its essence, it's a process of self-organization, so it can't really be done for you. It has to be done by you, and it's a thankless task. As someone who does give a lot of free time to these kind of endeavors, I feel it's a net positive, but each person has to find their own way to square the circle and just, work out their own cost versus benefit trade-off. One issue is it a formal organization or is it just informal and social? Social, informal collaboration versus formal structures. Keeping it loose and informal versus getting choked up with rules and admin. Whether or not to build a bureaucracy, that is the question. Important questions are, is it a legal entity? Does it need a bank account? Is it raising funds? Does it have tax liabilities? Is it making promises to its members and the government or the industry at large? And can it fulfill them? Running costs. Even the simplest of organization requires real money to administer. That's the bottom line. Over and above the gallons of free time that members put into these ventures, at the end of each year, accountants, website hosts, and many other service providers need to be paid in hard cash. The organization has to be in a viable position, sustainable position, running on either stable corporate sponsorships, government grants, or membership fees. That is before you're actually doing anything concrete to give back to the members. So holding events, providing training, or doing any lobbying only pushes that price up. This is kind of the watershed between an informal social meetup that costs nothing and the formalized organization which has operating costs and obligations. Obviously, there's the issue of national identities and different regions and different problems around the world, local and global concerns, how the concerns of different areas need to be met, dealing with a local culture, political issues of a specific geographic area. For example, could a European-centric organization truly serve the needs of Hollywood, and vice versa? It's even more complex if you consider Nigeria and India as two other large film industries. Should each region organize according to its local situation and needs? And I think the answer to that is definitely yes. Should there be global cooperation between the regions? If so, what role is it filling? And what is the benefit to its members and the industry at large? On the topic of production concerns, we're in the phase of kind of smaller crews, efficiency, and tighter budgets. I would rather cautiously say that we're in the midst of a trend to more, automate the production process, a continued trend to optimize and reduce the cost of film productions. Budgets are decreasing, while access to knowledge and technology is increasing. The barriers to entry to filmmaking are lowering. I've heard lots of people express the goal to shoot projects with smaller crews, assemble a team of fewer people who would be willing to fill several roles rather than many specialists who end up doing a lot of waiting around. In larger industry, this triggers many landmines with trade unions and definition of roles in our industry. With budgets and time pressure increasing, we have to look at ways of automating the process, or do we? That's a very important question. Development and training, that's a huge area of interest for these organizations. In some sense, these industry endeavors are pinned upon acknowledging that generations come and go, and that an industry must be constantly replenished with new talent. Do older members keep their secrets closely guarded, or do they openly teach what they know and build the next generation? Are there funds to pay teachers for formalized and well-structured courses? Does the organization have links to the local universities and colleges? Does the organization promote higher education and certification for working professionals that might not have degrees? Is there an open dialogue and opportunity for interaction between students of the arts and working professionals? Do training institutions call on professionals to teach courses? Other than just learning theory, are there well-structured mentorship programs that link interested and talented students with companies and professionals? Mentorships and rites of passage were very prevalent in the industry about 20 years ago, much less so now on average. Is it okay to leave training up to the YouTube algorithm? Another topic is silos within production. I'd say it's a greater need for creative collaboration, the need for open discussion, and to bring down silos that exist. On-set and post-production are two of the many silos in our industry, and they each have their own cultures and methods. But as a single example, consider the best practices of cinematographers, DITs, and colorists in the process of look design, pipeline design on any particular job. It's clear that lots of discussion, collaboration, planning, and testing and interaction is needed to get the best creative and technical solutions in place. Due to the pressure of long working hours on set and the processes and hierarchies in place, how should colorists and DITs best integrate into the look design and shooting process? And similarly, how cinematographers can best integrate into the post-production process to achieve their vision. These are topics that I believe are still very much in their infancy. Regarding recognition and awards, recognition, long-term service awards, creative awards, competitions, this does seem to be one of the most tangible aspects of this whole puzzle that people can latch onto. One issue, though, is that the presence of experienced and unbiased adjudication makes or breaks the reputation of such competition and awards. Competition is only as good as its judges. Industry personalities is also an issue. Personalities and control. Strong personalities are a blessing and a curse. When they're altruistic, they can do great things for these unifications, but they can also lead the whole endeavor astray and damage people's trust if they abuse the cooperation for personal gains. Strong personalities want to control organizations and processes, but also strong leaders are needed to drive the process forward. Transparency and governance. Is there good governance and oversight in place for the organization? Transparency is critical. Usually these bodies need to be set up as non-profit organizations with transparent management processes, accounting, and oversight. It's all easier said than done. Efficiency and decision-making. Here it's an issue of democracy and consultation on every issue versus a proactive leadership that just goes out and does it. What decisions need consensus from members? It becomes a trade-off between getting buy-in versus the organization actually making swift progress? And a bigger question is it actually a trade union? One of the contentious topics that these industry organizations often face is wage negotiations and working conditions. As an example, I'm in a market where 3 months after date of invoice is the norm for payment of freelancers, and sometimes even up to 6 months. So this is obviously a pain point. Is it a money-making tactic, or is it just a reflection of how our clients are getting paid by their clients? And it's a wider systematic issue. For people working on set, these discussions include overtime rates, if shooting goes longer than expected, and minimum turnaround times between shifts. Especially for grips and lighting, where driving trucks, working with heavy machinery and high voltage should not be done if you're sleep deprived. The other side of the coin is that production companies would expect crews to work efficiently to high standards. To answer the question I posed earlier, are we stronger together or not? One example could be if rates are standardized across an industry, or at least if you know roughly what your competitors are charging, then it's easier to hold the line and push back in rate negotiations with clients. That opens up a veritable can of worms though, with stabilizing long-term rates on the one side versus short-term undercutting to win the job. I think this applies up and down the scale. Large companies might undercut heavily just to win a prestigious job, and talented newbie freelancers might undercharge because they haven't thought about investing in gear, renting a premises, hiring staff, or their own medical aid and pensions, etc., etc. Other industries do this very well and actively resist their product or service being devalued. Not so easy for film production rates though. In the 30 years that I've been in the industry, it has moved from invoicing, which included the rates, the line item of each thing that was being used, so the person, the equipment, even food, beverages, and any other services could be added in as well, including suppliers' costs were added into that invoice, and then we added a 20% markup on top of that. And this would cascade from post-facility to offline edit house to production company to advertising agency and then to client, each stage adding their markup on top. Nowadays, many of those links have been short-circuited, going directly to the supplier and only being able to charge an hourly rate for what you do. The first wave of this was triggered by clients hiring cost consultants to check details on budgets and cross-hiring of people who knew secrets of one stage of the production to optimize and cost cuts at another stage. When it comes to setting payment levels and terms of engagement, wage negotiations are a very sensitive subject. In some areas of the world, film professionals are unionized, and industry-wide action is possible to negotiate rates and working conditions. The Actors and Writers Guild of the USA are good examples of this. Generally speaking, it seems that this level of negotiation needs to have the whole industry sector involved at a government level. If a few individuals or even organizations fight for pay increases, it's often the result will be that they themselves get blacklisted and their reputation with their clients gets compromised. Generally, the process is the industry needs to organize itself into an organization. Then the organization approaches the government via the department handling arts and film. And then if the government prioritizes the film industry as a key part, linked to GDP, or if they want to highlight workers' rights and representation, then industry-wide negotiation can start to take place. Regarding film funding, often the main role of these organizations is to interface with government, and specifically the national film funds. Does the government support the film industry as a way to boost GDP and create jobs? Does the government know how to effectively engage with the creative sector? Is there good communication between the creative sector and the government? Some global trends in film finance and production. Just in case anyone listening is unaware, films often rely on funding from several countries. But the condition is that that certain percentage of the budget gets spent in that country, hence creating jobs and boosting the economy and publicizing the country's locations. The decline of work in one country might lead to a boom in other countries in other parts of the world. Productions of all levels are on tighter and tighter budget constraints, so tax breaks, currency exchanges, and many other global factors affect film production month to month and year to year. We often hear about a small European country being the new place to go and shoot because it's cheap and has tax incentives. South Africa and Taiwan are two areas that I have experience in, and both have had this reputation at various times. After a few years, though, these low location fees and cheap crews all rapidly increased to come in line with global norms, and hence the productions have to move to other cheaper countries and so-called undeveloped markets. So if streamers are closing down their productions in New York and shifting them to Europe or to Asia, these tides affect local and global employment alike. Also, if streamers are buying up production facilities, then cost cutting is definitely on the agenda. Another topic is copyright issues. With the advent of social media, streaming platforms, and now machine learning content generation, copyright ownership for creators is a topic that these industry organizations can help to tackle. It's a very difficult topic to pry apart, though. Legal help for members, standardizing freelance contracts, budgets, quote structure, payment terms, and the sticky subject of blacklisting companies for non-payment or helping members to take legal actions are just some examples. Essentially giving members more power and resources in these negotiations. Just to wrap up with a case study, I've recently been involved in setting up the newly formed South African Finishing Artists and Image Technicians Society. This includes colorists, DITs, online editors, and VFX artists. It's still in its infancy, so very much a work in process that is responding to the demands of the local situation, especially attempts of the government to reinvigorate the film sector. These are some of the portfolios or roles that have been identified for the organization to tackle in the future. So obviously the chair, vice chair, secretary and the admin roles, treasury and accounting, policy and legal affairs, training and development, technology and innovation, marketing, communication and social media in general, membership and recruitment, labor relations, health and safety, fundraising and sponsorship, event coordination, awards and recognition, local and international partnerships, an oversight committee to make sure that the organization is meeting its own goals. To wrap up this introduction, I'd love to hear stories from you if you've had good or bad experiences with these kind of organization attempts in the past. Please let me know in the comments, and also any insights that you've had from being involved in these processes. So with that as a very messy overview of the task of industry organization at large, let's get into my discussion with Kevin on these topics. That's all interesting. I mean, what I did want to slowly move towards, because I think you've got a very unique viewpoint on it, is how our industry is trying to organize itself in the various ways. I mean, could you tell us how your involvement with CSI and the birth of CSI and how that all came about?
I mean, people have been talking about organizing colorists since I started, certainly. And there used to be, in the Telecine days, there used to be the Telecine Internet Group,
right,
which was an informal collaboration. It was basically an online forum, and we'd get together once or twice a year at the trade shows. It was really just a matter of sharing information. That was all it was.
Yeah.
And gradually we'd have engineers on there as well as colorists. And I think a lot of the manufacturers would monitor it. So it was quite useful, but it was very Telecine-centric, unassuming, quite unambitious, really.
Yeah.
So there was always this idea that we needed to be organized. And then as we moved to software and the workflow changed from colorists being this gateway from film to video, and colorists then started being the finishing stage of having to conform and deliver, that was a huge increase in responsibilities.
Right.
And then jump forward again and start talking about color managed workflows, where a colorist might be involved actually in the preparation stages of look management and pipeline design, visual effects, and so on. And it became clear that we needed to educate our clients as to the best way to do things.
Right.
Because it really got to the point of, I would say, more than half of what the colorist did was fix things that had got broken, not necessarily in camera, but in post-production, in visual effects, in editing, whatever it was. And there was a conversation with Dale Grun, who was the timer on Saving Private Ryan and so on. And he said a very true thing. He said, if you are not represented, you're not going to get recognized.
Right.
And I took that to heart. And, the Telecine Internet Group was a decade out of date and kind of really had lost its way, mainly because of the guy that organized it and founded it had a rather tragic...
Rob Leinbach, rest in peace, yeah.
Yeah, so a rather tragic ending. So the idea was to have a group, have an organized group where we could do what the Telecine Internet Group did, but be much more influential in terms of educating clients and also feeding back to manufacturers. Because journalists and manufacturers had said to me, "Oh, who do I call?" We don't. I said, "Why don't you have colorists on panels, for example, like you do cinematographers?" And there were two main reasons. One was, well, every time we call a colorist, they back out at the last minute because a job comes in. So that was one problem. And the other one was, well, colorists don't agree amongst themselves, so it's quite political choosing who you want to have on a panel.
Right.
Coupled with some of the bigger facilities who actively managed what colorists could and could not say. It wasn't uncommon at that point, for example, for a company to say, you are not allowed to say anything to the press. You're not allowed to be on a panel unless we tell you what to say.
Proprietary workflows and all that good stuff, yeah?
Yeah. Like, don't share, and, you toe the company line, and you are... Again, it was that sort of lost leader thing of you are here to support the rest of the team, not the other way around. They were, especially the bigger companies, they're very afraid of the sort of the prima donna image, because those types of colorists are very hard to keep.
Yeah.
Because you get the colorists, you get the jobs. Anyway, so around 2015, we just kind of started floating on some of the forums. Let's just do this. And I had some experience with setting up the International Colorist Academy. So I thought, well, this is actually not as hard as people make out. The killer was we went out there and said, what should we call this organization? What do you want this organization to be? It's not going to be a union. It needs to be a professional organization, but it's not a union. It's a voluntary organization for the benefit of the members, but also for a benefit of the industry in terms of education. Really, that was the biggest problem, because, and you could see immediately why there wasn't an existing organization. For a year, people were debating the name of the organization.
Right.
And it was clear that there was never going to be any agreement. It was also clear that, that we needed to be represented. So we kind of tongue in cheek, I mean, it wasn't quite as haphazard as I make out, because if you try to set up a company, you realize how hard it is to find a domain name, for example.
Right.
If you're setting up an organization, it's inevitably going to come down to an acronym. And I think the most popular name at the time was something along the lines of International Colorist Society. Yeah. That was it. That was the most common name, the common request. And there were two problems with that. One is that I was already, a founding member of the International Colorist Academy, and it was just too close. I mean, even now people kind of get them a bit mixed up.
Yeah.
So that was so I was a bit reluctant on that side of things. And then I went onto the internet and said, do a search for ICS, and it turned out that ICS is actually the Incontinence Society. Right. And I thought, we're never going to live that down if we get confused with the Incontinence Society. Right. And because of that, we thought, you know what, let's just make a joke of it and use an acronym that people already know, so CSI, right, and go with that. And in retrospect, it was not such a great idea. We should have been more serious about it. CSI was a hugely popular TV program at the time, and so particularly in America, it was it was hard for them to take it seriously. We've got around it now by dropping the international. So jump forward at 8 years, right, and we have enough representation around the world that we are divided into local chapters. So it's the Colorist Society is the umbrella organization, and then you've got Colorist Society Hollywood, and Colorist Society Poland, and Colorist Society Germany, and Colorist Society Australia, New Zealand, and so on and so on. So we've kind of sorted it. But that was it. That was it. And was it a worthwhile process? Absolutely. I mean, almost immediately we had phone calls from NAB, IBC, the Academy, people that wanted to organize colorists, but didn't want to be the ones that organized them. They just wanted to have a, who do you call sort of thing.
Right.
And so we got offered, you can have they called it in the original days, they called it at NAB, they called it birds of a feather. And they literally said, here's a room, do what you want with it. You've got an hour to hold a meeting.
Right.
And that happened around the world in different situations. We would have journalists saying, we need, we'd like a colorist, but we'd rather it was a female colorist because we want to meet diversity quotas and things. Can you have a female colorist that's in the sort of Hollywood top tier A-level movies? Sure, we can help you with that. We had people getting visas, having to change countries, or sometimes having to change countries, or sometimes wanting to change countries. And they need reference letters that are internationally recognized.
Yeah, I use that for my citizenship application in Taiwan, so I can vouch for that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people just needed that, whereas in the past, it was really, really hard. So I think from that point of view, it's been worthwhile. In terms of education, yes, because we have a PR company that is quite well connected. So we work closely with SEMTI and the Academy, and we can get stuff in the press and we can talk about things that we need to talk about and make people aware. We've had considerable success, for example, on film credits.
Yeah.
It's our belief that now that colorists are actually finishing the program, in fact, on a lot of movies, the only person that's actually watched every single frame and sort of caressed every single frame will be the finishing colorist.
Yeah.
And so we feel that there are situations where the colorist should get a above the line, full page title credit.
Front credit, yeah.
And that does happen. People like Eric Whip have, without the benefit of the Colorist Society, but people like Eric Whip have made that work. But where the Colorist Society has come in is we've been able to educate. So we had a situation a couple of years back where the director had wanted to give the colorist a full page credit up front. The DGA, the Directors Guild of America, said, no, there's no precedent for that. You can't do it. And he was a Colorist Society member, and he said, what do I go back with? And we sent him, a full-on report of films where that had happened, including Fury Road, but a number of films where that had happened, and said, look, it's not unique. It is justified.
It's a trend, yeah.
We understand that you don't want to do it on every film. We're not saying that necessarily you have to do it on every film. But where the colorist has been integral with look development, then it does make perfect sense that you would recognize that in the film. And they accepted that. And, so that's now made it easier for future colorists to, in the right circumstances, get that full page credit.
Yeah.
So there's lots of things, and we've kept the tradition of the internet group. So we now own the Colorist Mixer brand, if you will, and those are great. So we get people turning up to trade shows that maybe only know a few people from online forums and things. They go to a trade show, and we actively encourage people to interact and to meet the people and talk to people that they may have heard about but not had the chance to talk to. And it's a two-way thing. Like sometimes if you're working in a big market on expensive high-end budgets, you need to hear about what's happening at the low end in terms of cameras and things. So that's been instrumental. Next year we'll grow the mixers from, it was always NAB, and then it was NAB and IBC. The last 2 years, this will be the third year that we support Camera Image because of the Filmlight Colorist Awards.
Yeah, that seemed to be a very, very nice initiative. It's coming in.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to do that ourselves. We tried to have our own color awards, and it became obvious that it's a very big undertaking, and it would have been challenging for us financially to do that on our own. So now we work closely, support Filmlight, and they do a fantastic job. And part of that is to run a mixer at Camera Image, and we invite the winners and the jury to have a panel discussion in a bar, and everybody gets to meet, mix, and talk to them as well. And the thing I like, there's two things I like particularly about the way Filmlight have done the Colorist Awards. One is that because it's free to enter, and because they have worked really hard to have categories that don't exclude anybody.
Yeah.
So there's a low budget category. There's this year, for the first time, there's a newcomers category, but then there's also the A-list feature film, and then there's a commercial category, a music category. So that's great. And then the other thing that I really love, because it firmly kind of shuts down that whole communication problem we had in the display referred days, is every winner, every colorist winner has a reference from the cinematographer, usually in the form of a taped congratulations type message, where the cinematographer says, "I'm really glad this colorist won. This is what they contributed. This is how they contributed to the end result." And I think we need that. I think we need to finally dispel that belief that the colorist and the cinematographer work against each other.
Yeah.
They don't. They absolutely work together.
You're shepherding that, at least you're achieving the vision, and hopefully you're adding to it as well.
You know, cinematographers are actually in a very similar situation to colorists, except they've been organized for over 100 years.
Right.
They are given a brief, and they have to interpret that and create, capture images. Well, we are also given a brief. The images are captured, but we have to do that last stage, that display stage.
Yeah, the raw materials are captured, but it's by no means the final image.
It's not baked in. It's absolutely not baked in. So, so I feel, I won't say more on that. I don't want to be too controversial, but I have strong feelings on that relationship.
I've experienced I realized that, oh shit, I'm actually an online editor as well. I didn't realize it. When did that happen? And I realized, oh shit, the last 5 or 6 features I've done both. Oh, I thought I was just the colorist. No, you're actually the online editor.
Oh, yeah, and you'll have
just
to do
kind of
visual
snuck up.
effects. And,
minor visual effects, more and more. Yeah.
And if you have a sound background, they'll ask you to do sound as well.
Right. Why not? I mean, obviously there's this feeling to organize, this motivation to organize, it's very natural, and I think it's going to happen in any industry. And obviously, it's got different flavors. It can be the full-on trade union that's standardizing rates, that's lobbying government and all that. But what I will say on that is, it works on many levels. The typical response I've heard I've been involved in many these kind of organization attempts over the years. But the government really wants one body to talk to. They said, you're an industry, go and organize yourself, then come talk to us. Like give us the interface to talk with. We can't talk to companies. That doesn't work. We can't talk to individuals. We need the umbrella organization, and then we can fund you. We can tell us what you need. We've got money. We don't know how to spend it. We don't understand your industry. So organize yourself and then come to us and we'll talk. So I think that's true in every country. There are different reasons to unite. Like, okay, we're in New York, so we're the New York colorists, or personal friends, so it's a very local social thing. Or, it's like rates for colorists are way too low. We need to, the whole country or the whole industry needs to, there are lots of different reasons. I mean, I've always been in small markets, and the kind of call it the plight or the point of view of colorists in my position in small countries, you can't get to NAB every year. You feel like you're on the outside of this. Obviously, it's changing now with forums. There's so much connectivity now, but yeah, it's just a very different perspective in each country.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we definitely see that within the society, and it was a challenge in the early days because the difference between what most of the colorists in the world need and what those colorists in the we all want the 7-figure jobs and the big budget movies and so on. But there's something of an irony there. So I definitely think there's a difference between what a small market colorist needs compared to an A-lister possibly working for a big company, but some of them are freelance as well. And certainly there's going to be a much bigger group in the small markets compared to that sort of A-lister group.
Right.
So the first problem with the A-lister group, which is what a number of colorists wanted, is they wanted to be an exclusive group. And they would point to cinematography organizations where, you had to be voted in. And it becomes like a little club.
Yeah.
And so here's my experience of that. That's all well and good, but nobody in that particular group has any time to do the organization.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to appoint people to do it. And that's going to, because there's only a few of you, now a few people are going to have to contribute enormous amounts of money to get the group going and to pay people to do the organizing part of it. So we approached it in a different, because I know there is a demand for that, and we have achieved that now with the Colorist Society Hollywood group, which is a more elite group, and you have to be elected and invited in. But in order to get to the point where that was financially viable, we had to build the infrastructure to host that group. And the way to do that was to accommodate the needs of the bigger market,
right,
where what they really want is recognition. See, that elite group, they've already got recognition. They don't need that.
Yeah.
But the bigger market, particularly either working in a smaller market or working in a smaller company, is they want validation and they want to be recognized. And so we treated it more like an accounting organization or a surveyor's organization, a professional organization that isn't judging you as a unique skill, but is simply saying you are a qualified professional.
Yeah.
Because when software came in, we had people literally grading off a laptop in their bedroom, competing full on with somebody with 10 years of experience and a whole facility around them. And on a creative side, I accept that. But what was happening is they were forcing prices down because they would do it for anything. They would do it, £100 a grade, because for them, they weren't professionals. It was just something they wanted to get into. And I used to say to students, if you charge so little money that you can't afford to live off it, well, actually, you're not a professional. A professional is somebody who makes their living from doing that job. And so we needed to differentiate those colorists that were truly professional and made their living doing color grading from those people that were hobbyists or trying to get into the market and were driving costs down to a point where the whole industry was going to disappear. And actually, during the actors and the writers' strike, we saw that was a valid fear, because what happened was that, okay, the actors and the writers had reason to strike, but because there was no work for a segment of the post-production industry, there are a lot of post-production casualties and a lot of people, good people, that have left it and probably won't ever come back to the market.
Yeah, you mean companies closing, or okay, I got you.
Yeah. So it's very, very important for us to differentiate between the professionals, and so that was our line in the sand. 3 years full-time colorist experience, not an editor that does a bit of color grading, not a cinematographer that grades their own stuff. We accept those into the society, but technically they don't qualify as full membership. They become alliance members or sometimes associate members.
Yeah.
So that was absolutely necessary to do that at the time that we started it. And by growing that market, we then had the financial stability and the infrastructure of the website, accounting firms, legal firms, PR firms to support the elitist group.
Right.
And so then we could go to the elite colorists and say, look, I know you didn't really like what we did to start with, but we can now offer you what you want. In return, all we expect is that you give back in terms of education and influence.
Right.
And I have to say that the Colorist Society Hollywood group, all of the chapters do that, but the Colorist Society Hollywood group has been incredibly proactive in doing exactly that.
It's one of the important factors to perceiving yourself as being, well, firstly, that your career is a valid career. There's a beginning, middle, and end of that career. There's an education path. There's, we're not there yet, but down the line, there's kind of, I wouldn't say job security. That's a very hard thing to say now, but maybe things like pension and all those things, maybe down, a long way down the track. But yeah, it's just a process of recognition.
Yeah, and it does open doors, like you say. Government. We haven't actually acquired any money from governments, I have to say. Although we are a registered non-profit, so we manage to hang on to a lot of what we do get in.
Right.
But certainly, yeah, manufacturers, journalists, people now have somewhere that they can call, and then we can redirect them to wherever we think that can go, or we can go to press and kind of make statements and do sort of thought leadership and things.
But it's probably quite a complicated jigsaw puzzle, because you've got individuals, you've got corporations, in terms of bigger organizations, IMDB and all those kind of things that you might need to interact with, and vendors, the equipment. So presumably that's also quite a complicated puzzle to balance out, because the key thing is perception, and the perception of you must be neutral, you must be you're not the banner of any individual person, you're an organization that lives beyond the life of any particular person, and it's financially transparent, and So yeah, it's quite a lot of hats to wear and roles to fill.
Yeah, and when you put it like that, it does sound like a minefield. But actually, there's a way to make it easier, because Colorist Society is a voluntary organization. So yes, we do pay legal organizations and PR companies because nobody else is going to do it. But it's voluntary, and that's a mixed blessing. It basically means that there's a lot of things that we just can't do because we don't have the bandwidth to do it.
Right.
And so when people sort of come to me and say, well, what is the Colorist Society going to do for me? What do I get for my annual fee? My immediate reaction really is, no, it's not what are we going to do for you? It's what are you going to do for us?
What skills do you have? What can you offer?
Yeah. Because nothing's going to get done unless people do it. And I get everybody's really busy, and that's what we want. We want to be busy, but to get results, then people have to contribute. So how do we deal with that? Well, we go to, so a lot of cases with the local chapters, for example, we go to groups that are informally already in existence, and we say, look, we can help you get to the next level. Instead of you having to pay a web developer and paying an accountant and deal with tax issues and so on, we've got all of that in place. We can provide you with the web design and oh, by the way, you've also got a certain Google rating and you're very visible before you even start. And we have the tax sorted out, and we have all of these things sorted out. So you're free to do what you need to do as a local group. That can only be done on a local level. We can't do that as an international organization. Some of these things we've tried and not really been as successful as we'd like. For example, having a legal contract. Well, the law is so different in different countries that I don't think we will ever have a single legal document that you could use in every country. Things like insurance and so on, those are going to be very specific to the local groups. However, if you want to see the latest monitor technology, or if you mentioned before, I can't get to the trade shows. That's not really very practical or realistic or useful for me to go to the trade shows. But as a local group, we can make it possible for the products or the manufacturers, or in some cases, instructors, to come to you. Because they will do that if there's an audience. They just don't want to take a chance on turning up and nobody comes.
Right.
So if we have a membership and we can say, well, okay, how many people would like to see this display? Or how many people would like to discuss, an ACES color managed workflow? Okay, suddenly we've put a local group and a manufacturer or another organization together and we've made something happen. But as you said before, that was very difficult because the organization doesn't have the time to go out and search the group. And the group doesn't have the time to take care of all of the PR and stuff necessary to make something like that happen. So we're just a facilitator. Well, I don't like to say just a facilitator, but that's a big part of what we do is we put people in touch and make it happen. And, you know, unfortunately, that's not global news. That's local news.
Right.
And it requires local participation.
Yeah, I've been pulled into that in very lots of different forms over the years. Because on the landscape, there are a couple of other organizations like the Visual Effects Society. They seem to have quite an effective, very solid presence and quite very well in, social events and movie screenings and things like that. Just generally across, say CSI, VES, and, I don't know, things like Blue Collar Collective and things like that. It seems like we've actually come a long way. So could you give your feeling on how far we've come versus how far we need to go, just in terms of the scope that you feel would be good to achieve?
There's no doubt that we have a long way to go. I mean, all of those organizations are much older than the Colorist Society. What we do have is we have bylaws. So, for example, the whole board could die tomorrow. God, they won't, but the whole board could die tomorrow. And the board, there's 5 people on the Colorist Society board, and then there's obviously officers on each of the local chapters as well. But there are bylaws in place that the organization is in good, not just financial standing, but legal standing in every way. So it won't go the way of the TIG, where, let's say, for whatever reason I have to drop out, suddenly it's gone. No, that's not the way it works.
Right.
It will continue, and everything is in place, from documentation and references of all the membership, for example, right down to the legal entity and the accounting presence and so on, and the bylaws that say what we do and don't do. So it's a solid foundation.
Is there a kind of a what do you call it, like a election cycle for the executive? How does that?
The bylaws certainly explain how elections will happen. The only reason that I'm still president is that nobody has wanted to take over the mantle. Yeah.
God damn it.
Because, and I'm in a lucky position because I'm essentially freelance. So I work for Mission, but not on a full-time basis. And I do instruction, but not on a full-time basis. And I grade, but not on a full-time basis. So I'm in a somewhat unique position where I'm well connected, and I am happy to put this in because I have my whole career felt that we need this. But yes, there's going to come a time when somebody's going to have to take it. My hope is that somebody on the existing board would take over, although currently they're all somewhat too busy to do it. But yes, if somebody said, oh, you're doing a terrible job, and they wanted to put themselves up for election, they only have to say the word.
That's part of the long term. I mean, just I've been involved in a bit of an organizational thing that's happened now in South Africa with colorists, visual effects people, DITs, and it's way wider than just a group of colorists. So it's quite interesting. We're calling ourselves the finishing artists and image technicians of South Africa. So it's really the fetus stage, so it's very early and things are spreading out in all directions. So we've got some great people who firstly know how to deal with government, know how to interface with government, but also are quite comfortable putting up structures. And now my thing is very, like, I'm focused on the social, like, let's get to know each other, let's have online mixes, let's meet up and have happy hours and things like that. So that's what I'm focusing on. I'm also focusing on teaching, but there are people in place who will do all the admin, and it's just in the list of stuff that they provided. It's literally 10 or 11 people's job, that you can easily fill. I mean, you've already mentioned that the society has outsourced legal and has outsourced marketing. So but if you're going to take all of that as the roles that need to be filled, it's, 15 people could be busy on this work,
Yes. And in my experience, that's usually what makes such a society short-lived, because as soon as
too widespread,
any one of those people gets busy, it falls down. There's nobody to hand it over to. So what we've tried to do is support those groups and say, that's great that you're doing all of that stuff, but we can take some of that burden, some of the kind of more routine, the bureaucratic stuff off your shoulders, and help you to be sort of a long-lasting organization rather than just limited to the current members.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Like, there's a lot of groups where they help each other, but then they fall out, or some of them leave or whatever, and then there's nobody to do the job, and so it just goes quiet.
Yeah, or it goes in spurts, like suddenly a lot and then dies down, just because it is on the back burner too often.
At the end of the day, we make our living as colorists or related, and I think you're right to expand the title not to a specific job, but to a department. And this is our big lobby with companies like IMDB, and
that's where I wanted to go next about this IMDB thing. So perfect.
Yeah, well, IMDB has been a thorn in our side and a bit of a challenge, but we have been more successful with organizations like Shot Deck and Shot on What, where they do recognize colorists and the related jobs. And for IMDB and the petition, we had a sort of an internal discussion about what those jobs would be. And we even tried to standardize the job titles to make it easier for IMDB to categorize. But what we want is a color department rather than a title that gets assigned to visual effects or editing or camera,
Well, what is the current situation? I think people are probably unclear of what the current situation is. Is basically we are sitting inside of the editorial department. Is that correct?
Well, if that was correct, it wouldn't be such a problem. It's that we are sitting inside of camera department, visual effects department, editing department, and somewhere else.
Oh, I see. As DITs. Got you.
Well, not just that, but if you do look development, for example, and that's used on set, you may get a camera credit rather than being editorial. A lot of colorists don't like being in editorial because they get calls then to do editing instead of color. And so they opt to be in visual effects, which is an advantage for a lot of colorists because you will never win an award as an editor, but there are colorists that get awards as part of the visual effects team. So it's very sort of political and convoluted. And the most common argument against having a color department is that, you are editors and you should be part of a post-production. But there's two problems with that. The first problem is that if you try and lump together everybody in post-production, then are you going to say that visual effects and sound, are you going to lump those into editing as well? Or because if you don't do that, then it's not post-production.
Right.
So I don't see any sense in making an existing category bigger. The idea is to make it easier to find people. We have to remember what is the purpose of these categories. It's to make it easier to find people.
Consistency. Consistent. You know where to put them and you know where to find. Yeah.
You know where to look. And at the moment, like I say, if everybody was in editorial, that wouldn't be such a problem. The problem is they are not. And secondly, it's an awareness thing that, as I say, we don't want to be seen as editors because that's not what we do. And we don't want editors to be seen as colorists because generally that's not what they do, although some of them will do a little bit of it. So I think it's important for people to understand. And I've had conversations as a result of the IMDB petition where people have said, I know, but I always, isn't it normal to go to the editor to get the color grading done? Well, no, if it was, we really would be out of a job. But mostly editors don't have time certainly they don't have time to go to the levels that a colorist does. Yes, they do get asked, particularly on news and broadcast jobs, they may get asked to do color grading, and a lot of them will choose to focus on that and become colorists.
Yeah.
But it's not the same job. And now that colorists are doing the finishing, I feel that it's a department, because you've got the conform guy, you've got the grading, but then you've got versions, you've got delivery, you've got the on-set presence, and I would include DITs. And we also include in the color department restoration, because that's a large part, as you said earlier, a large part of restoration is the color restoration.
Yeah.
And that understanding of what it should be like is important. So it would be nice to have all of those people in the same place and talking to each other, and color scientists as well, because a lot of the color scientists in the bigger companies will be instrumental in look development as part of the LUTs and so on. So we think that if we don't have a department, then that gets in the way of being recognized.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just in a nice, comfortable schematic of how a film crew gets laid out, it's almost, and we talk about it this way, like, I want to meet with the heads of department, and you'd have the head of the art, the production designer, or the art director, and then the cinematographer, and then who is head of sound. But as you get into the details of post-production and how wide it can be, all the way from like stock frame animators all the way to colorists and beyond, it's hard to see, like, who's the actual head of the post department that covers both the producing aspects and the creative aspects. Yeah, it's very complex.
Well, but you do have the post-production supervisor, but they're not technical, so they're not responsible for the sort of the creative aspects of it.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. I mean, that finishing colorist, particularly if they're in a color managed pipeline and they're working with a cinematographer on set, they're one of the very few people that are involved in production and in post-production. I mean, you might have a visual effects supervisor, for example, that is in production and post-production. You've got the post-production supervisor, and both of those are recognized. So it makes sense that the colorist is recognized as being responsible for delivery. I mean, nowadays, that is what the job entails.
Yeah, or even if it's three people's job, how those three get clumped together, the look development person, the dailies colorist, then the supervising colorist, the assistant colorists, that's the small set. You've already thrown it way wider than that.
Well, and we would be happy if people at least recognize that. But like I say, when you get emails and comments from people saying, "Oh, but I thought the editor did all that," well, they are totally unaware that color department exists. And like you say, that could be 5 or 6 people actually.
So I mean, what are we up against here? Is this a historic? Because I know editing as a craft came, it's probably 1910s or the 1920s or whenever, like really early in the process. So it was very clear, like, a writer writes stories, a cinematographer shoots pictures, an editor cuts those pictures together. These were very clear. Now, as the need for this, it's kind of grown, I guess, since when? Since the 50s, since the 60s.
Well, not exactly, because it's changed significantly.
Oh, color timer versus, okay.
Well, so you had the color timer, who was the last touch. And, like I say, Dale was, as a color timer, Dale Grahn felt that he never got the recognition that perhaps he should have done, because it was that last touch on delivering the print. But in video, of course, we didn't have the same responsibility, because we were just a gatekeeper, a link between production and post-production. And everything then had to go to editing, and editing got finished. And in many ways, that was why editors got the respect that they deserve, because they were taking the image and finishing it. They were the last runner in the relay race.
Yeah.
But now with the digital intermediate process, they are not the last runner in the process. It's the color department that is the last runner in the process. And that needs to be recognized. Because it's a bit weird, isn't it? Because if you think back on editing, if you think in film terms, you had a film editor working off prints who would hand it over to a neg cutter, a job that has gone out of business pretty much. Yeah. And the neg cutter would do the final cut, the one-time only cut.
What we call the conform and grade now. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's exactly it. To take it back into the more video type names, then the film editor was an offline editor, and the neg cutter was the online editor.
Right. And
so what's happened then is we got this period where the offline, the Avids and the Lightworks, So, and then, Adobe Premiere and so on, Final Cut and so on, they got so good that the offline and online became blurred.
Right.
Because you would edit it and deliver it from editing. So there was that video period, let's call it, where the difference between offline and online got blurred. But now with the digital intermediate workflow, that is back to the idea that the editor is an offline editor, and then it's the color department that does the online conform and the grading and delivery. And that's a requirement because, like in the feature film days, we need to be color grading in context.
Yeah.
We need to see what the scene before and the scene after is going to be to do a good job.
And have final visual effects to...
And that's not been recognized. Yeah, and to add in the visual effects and to check the sound is in sync and all the rest of it. And so we're doing that final QR, and in an ideal world, feeding it back to visual effects, feeding it back to editing, feeding it back to sound. But as you've mentioned earlier, sometimes on the smaller budgets or the jobs that are perhaps not as well planned, the color, the buck stops on the color desk. And if there's a problem with visual effects, the colorist has to fix it. If there's a problem with the edit, colorist has to fix it. Even if there's a problem with the sound, colorist is going to have to fix it. So depending on how good the planning is, that's where the buck stops. And that has not been recognized. And until it is, the overall efficiency and quality of the workflow is going to be jeopardized.
Yeah, even if it's just the spreading the word that, I hate to think that people are not, I can't imagine people that have no clue over workflows nowadays. I'm sure the word's pretty widely spread, but yeah, confusion over workflow, because there are lots of options, there's now a lot of confusion over different workflows. And yeah, speak to the colorists, speak to them early, do tests, work it out before you shoot and all that. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, I work with, and you probably have experiences of this as well, but I've worked with film schools where they'll bring a colorist in at the end of the course to grade the final project. And in every single case, I've had students turn around and say, God, I wished I knew about this when we started because we would have shot it differently. Because there's things that we could do in the grade and there's things that we needed to get right on set. And by and large, they try and do too much in the camera and limit the options later on in post.
Yeah.
And if they had adopted the kind of standard workflow for sort of professional movie making, they would have spoken with the colorist and they would have had an agreement. There would have been advice where they said, oh yeah, okay, well you've got to do this in camera on set, but don't worry about that. We can take care of that. Even simple things like, oh, I noticed that my exposure is maybe a stop too bright. For God's sake, don't fix it halfway through the shoot, right? Because if you do that, it's twice as much work.
Yeah.
Just leave it. We can. That's not a big deal because you're dealing with a log image. You've got that much latitude. It's not a problem. Changing it, that is a problem. Now you start to get not just that it's got to be fixed, but now maybe your depth of field is different, or other things have changed.
Yeah.
And so in film schools, for sure, they're not teaching that to the level that I would really hope for. And we kind of push to try and get it a bit earlier on. But it is, the message is getting out there. I recently spent a month in China, and a large part of my students were high school teachers. So we had film school people, but high school teachers, because in China, they teach post-production in a lot of the high schools. And so I think we are getting there and getting this message across. And companies like Blackmagic, accommodate that market. That's a big part of their sort of sales strategy, is to get it into high schools and things.
Yeah, I mean, two examples to kind of support the trend that you're describing is, the one is I've taught a very short course, just like 5 sessions over 5 weeks, very short, very brief, to people as an elective kind of interest course at the high school level, where, you know, in Taiwan, the schools are kind of saying, let's have interesting courses. Let's not just do all these, you know, set 6 subjects and that's it. Let's learn about laser print, 3D printing. Let's learn about this and that. So that's the one thing. The other thing is I taught a 1 semester course at a college in South Africa recently on color grading. And some of the comments I got is, can't this be a whole year course? Because you know that as you're teaching, you don't want to hold back. You know, you're just showing, okay, there's a lot of depth, but we've got no time. You know, we've only got 8 sessions. Yep. And so there was a clear response. Obviously, there's a lot of, you know, YouTube people, but because of YouTube, because of the information out there, people know about and hungry for the knowledge. But yeah, in formal institutions, it could easily be slotted into the curriculum start to finish.
Yes, and the only place that I know that really did that was in Germany. They had, for 5 years, they had the upgrade class, which was a 1-year sort of post-degree course. But the funding for that dried up and they didn't manage to secure alternate funding. So it was a government or a EU funded scheme.
Yeah.
And they needed to find industry sponsors, which very sadly, for all sorts of reasons, didn't happen. Of course, it happened at a terrible time with COVID and stuff. And so we lost that, which is a shame. But yes, again, I can't help but feel if there was a greater awareness of the roles that we play in the movie making, motion picture making pipeline, that there would be more full-time courses and better awareness.
Yeah.
And so even if the Colorist Society only makes a small contribution, that is a seriously important contribution, because without it, it's just not going to happen for sure.
Right. Okay, Kevin, I've taken a lot of your time, so maybe as a last question, it's kind of an issue that I've faced, you know, we're discussing this in the South African Finishing Artists Society. And okay, people going to film schools, the young people that, you know, that they're coming out and they're getting better and better training, hopefully, and maybe they'll learn more and more about coloring, and so they'll come out and actually knowing something. And that's professionals like myself can teach at those courses to raise the level and all this thing. That's wonderful. But for people who are already working, who they can't just go and take 3 years out and go to a university. The process of getting certified, standardized, having some industry tests or having some some criteria to compare yourself against, it all comes back to, okay, find some standards and then develop some education that meets those standards, and then we've got a nice closed loop. And we can, there can be proper, training that you can say, it's kind of like Dolby certification, but for the whole job, not just for that one thing. Have you encountered this issue as a kind of a need for standards which define the job of a colorist? And can you? It's so hard and so wide. It's not just, you can't go to SMTP because that's technical standards.
No. Yeah.
I mean, who do you go to? Obviously, film schools are the place to do it, but that's at a certain stage in your career. But for everyone who's past that stage, could you see some route forward?
So look, it is something that we've looked at. The German chapter of Colorist Society did some work with the German Cinematography Society, the BVK, and they spent a lot of time and effort creating a document which listed the roles, the duties and responsibilities of the colorist. And we have a modified version of that actually on the Colorist Society website to define what you would expect a professional colorist to do. The problem with having a certification is that it's not one role.
Yeah.
And the responsibilities of a commercial colorist would be very different from, say, a feature film colorist. A feature film colorist with a color managed pipeline would be very different to an indie film that turns up, with editing and everything all picture locked. So you would actually find it difficult to have one certification that was reasonably fair to all sides of the industry. And I don't want to, or at least I don't think we would want to force people to do unnecessary training. I remember talking to a colorist who is in the in one of the American unions, the ATSI type unions. Although there is actually a colorist category in those unions, almost nobody is in it because you generally get assigned. You just need to be a union member, and they'll just put you in the easy sort of category. So a lot of the colorists in that union will be listed as editors or visual effects. So it's kind of similar to the IMDb problem. It may even be contributing to the IMDb problem. And I was talking to one guy about this who works on union shows. And I said, so what category do you fall under? And he said, well, I'm in sound. And I said, how does that work for you? Is that, I mean, obviously it's, in a way, it's a slap in the face, but is it actually a problem to do that? Because at least you get advice on pensions and, working conditions and so on. And that's got to be a good thing, right? That's better than nothing. And he said, it is a bit annoying. He said, because I have to do mandatory training on a sound desk to be a colorist. And he said, that training is absolutely of no use to me whatsoever. And I have no interest in it, but I have to do it because I'm part of the union process.
Well, it's not like CPR, which is actually useful.
Well, exactly. So my feeling is that I don't think it's very easy to create a certification along the lines of, say, Dolby Vision training. And I don't think it would be that useful unless you were very, very specific. So maybe you could have a certification for conforming, or maybe you could have a certification for creating LUTs or something very, very specific. But I don't think that would be useful from an industry point of view. And that was why our decision in the sort of the wider perspective of the Colorist Society was, if you are recommended by your peers, if you have 3 years full-time professional experience and some, and you've delivered jobs, then we consider you fit for purpose. I think that's a reasonable, so the acid test. So when somebody joins the Colorist Society as a full member, the acid test is, would you send, if you were fully booked or if you were sick and you couldn't finish a job, would you trust this colorist with your client? Are they good enough for you to hand over? Because if they're not, then you don't want them in the society, because we have to trust each other. And this was another obstacle really to overcome. If you look at cinematographers on a panel, or editors on a panel, or visual effects on a panel, they always back each other up and support each other and sort of send a positive message to the audience.
Right.
In the past, we had a situation where colorists were openly criticizing each other in forums and so on. And that's not a good way to build up our respect. We have to respect each other. Yeah, exactly. So I think, what we want is to support each other, and we need to trust each other. And so I think this evidence that you've done the job is really the sort of certification that I feel that we need, rather than having to do a test and say, okay, this person knows how to balance blacks, or this person knows how to take an edit list and put it together on a timeline. I think it would be a little bit too restrictive and possibly insulting to try and define the job in that way. I mean, is there a qualification for cinematographers? Not really. I don't think so.
Lens cap off and you're good.
Happens.
Joking. How about this for a bit of a screwball one, which is not official. It's not official. It's just very interesting, and it could become an informal thing. I won't go all the way to say rite of passage, but something like that. So the film that I remastered recently, it's film from a lot of different cameras, big budget shoot, shot over big scenes, shot over the whole day, morning, noon, and night. So the sun's moving around. The film's all 20 years old. It's all been stored in different places. It's all drifted. It had the year, I guess, the late 90s, 1999, when they shot and when they were doing their post. That was the level of DI that they were doing, and some very big effect shots. So it's kind of badly color managed, whatever was available at that time for color management. So it's a salad it's the hardest job I've ever matched. If the production company could give one roll of that film just as a, like, test yourself out on this footage, and then it could become, you could almost get these, like, okay, you get a certain scene from this or a certain scene from that. It can have watermarks, burn tint onto it. It's controlled environment or whatever, and it's you can, like, go to a facility, then you can play on the footage, have your experience, and then leave, kind of thing. We'd have to keep the footage secure and all that kind of thing. But I think that's a really interesting idea. Is like, some really well-known film, really hard footage to balance. How did you do under the circumstances? Personal challenge kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that would be interesting, but you're talking simply about matching and not look development and client management.
Give them the whole task.
To be honest with you, the last time I was in the Japanese market, which is a few years back now, but they do that at a company level.
Yeah.
They have a colorist test when you go from assistant to senior colorist. Mm-hmm. And first of all, I don't think anybody ever passes first time. And secondly, there's quite a big pay benefit once you pass. They all go out to dinner and celebrate because it's a big deal. But they do that. They have, the assistant colorist has to do matching tasks in front of the senior colorist of the same company, and they take it very, very seriously. Yeah. So I think that we can do that, but to try and mandate it as a requirement.
Just personal interest only. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's like, it can go one of two ways. It can go like sort of being a black magic instructor, where there are so many hundreds of people that pass it. Not saying that it's not a good thing to do. I think it's a great thing to do, but it doesn't really give you any benefit. It doesn't actually make you a professional colorist, and it doesn't put you head and shoulders above anybody else. I think the fact that you can just do the job, if you can prove you've done the job, then that in itself is a certification process.
Yeah, you have a showreel, have a client list, etc. Yeah.
From a film school point of view, I think that would be awesome, because they don't have that experience in the chair as a professional. And so that would be the nearest thing that you could test them on, is to say, well, this is, your worst nightmare of a real job. How do you get on?
Yeah. Okay, cool, Kevin. Thanks so much for your time.
I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks again for listening to the Color Mentor podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can leave comments on Patreon or Instagram. The Instagram handle is color.mentor. And remember to head over to the Color Mentor page on patreon.com and check out the goodies there. We'll see you next time.